You're listening to The Unsafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown.
God is the God of the past. He's the God of the present and the future. He knows everything. He sees everything. And he's saying he will be king. Past, present, and future. He is king. That's the term he's using. There's always been a remnant in Israel that will follow him, always. Just as there is in the church today, a remnant that is following the Lord. The whole planet Earth isn't following him, but those of us who love him and have given our lives to him, we're part of that remnant.
God is the God of the past, present, and future. As you listen to today's message from Pastor Ken, he shares with you the undeniable truth that God is the same today, yesterday, and forever. He knows the end from the beginning. He's the author and finisher of faith for all who follow him. Pastor Ken encourages you to keep faithfully walking with the Lord. Know that he will equip you with all that you need if you daily surrender to him and his will. He will make your paths straight. Well, let's join Pastor Ken in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 20, as he begins his message, Back to the Future.
God will not put up or tolerate sin at all. And he hasn't changed his mind about it either, even though we have people today who think he has. He has not. So as a result of this, God is speaking through Ezekiel to the elders. And he says in verse 33 of chapter 20, "As I live, declares the Lord, surely with a mighty hand and with an outstretched arm and with wrath poured out, I shall be king over you." That's not good news if you understand Old Testament images and Old Testament language. God is reiterating that he is king and that he will one day personally be king over the nation. I wonder what he's pointing at. He's pointing at the future millennial kingdom of Jesus Christ when he will rule personally over the land. The elders in that verse hear a phrase that immediately will take them back to Exodus if they know their Bible and what God did for them there. They should immediately, based on what is being said in verse 33, be reminded of what God says in the book of Deuteronomy. Now remember, he's using the terms with a mighty hand and with outstretched arms. In Deuteronomy chapter 4, we see the same terms used, verse 33 to 35. "Has any people heard the voice of God speaking from the midst of the fire as you've heard it and survived? Or has a God tried to go to take for himself a nation from within another nation by trials, by signs and wonders, and by war, and by a mighty hand and by an outstretched arm?" What God's explaining is that this is how he brought them out of the land of Egypt. It was an effort, and he was fully involved in doing that, as the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes. To you it was shown that you might know that the Lord, he is God, there's no other beside him. So if Ezekiel had stopped right there, the elders would be thinking, oh, we're going to get brought out, and a miracle is going to occur, just as happened back in the book of Exodus. God saved them with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and he's going to do that for us too. So, they're getting a little excited based on that. But then there's another term that gets used immediately after that. He says, with wrath poured out. Oh, no, wait a minute. That's not in Deuteronomy. God did not say that. He poured the wrath out on Egypt, not out on the people. But the way he says this, the people are going into exile. There's not going to be a miracle where the country is saved and taken out of Babylon and returned to Israel. It's not happening because Ezekiel has added the rest of God's message. Yeah, mighty hand, outstretched arm, but with wrath poured out. That's not good news. The prophet never applies the expression with wrath poured out to God's treatment of Israel's enemies. He only talks about Israel that way. That's not a good thing when that starts happening. Now remember, Jeremiah at this time is still in Jerusalem, and he's still prophesying too. And we have the advantage, because we have the book of Jeremiah and the book of Ezekiel, to start matching these messages together based on kind of where they are in the timeline at that point. I'm sure that Jerusalem News would probably be doing the same thing if they could, but they didn't have that capability. Jeremiah 21, this is the same time period, verse 4. Thus says the Lord God of Israel, behold, I'm about to turn back the weapons of war which are in your hands, with which you are warring against the king of Babylon and the Chaldeans who are besieging you outside the wall. And I'll gather them into the center of this city. I myself will war against you. And here it is, with an outstretched hand and a mighty arm. This is not good news for the nation of Israel. You start comparing what God did to bring them out of Egypt, and now he's using the same terms about how he's going to judge the nation. I will also strike down the inhabitants of this city, both man and beast. They'll die of a great pestilence. God's basically saying, you think by withdrawing from me and my worship, and by becoming more like Babylon, Babylonizing or whatever you want to call it, becoming more like the world, that you're going to secure yourself and escape danger. So because you think that you decided to go into captivity and you're going to save yourself in Babylon, and then you can continue to conduct yourselves the way that you did here and continue and worship Babylonian gods, that you're going to be okay. And God's telling him, no, you're my subjects. I'm your God. I will be king over you. And that's not going to work. I will not allow you to revolt. And he says he's going to put forth his hand and his arm in fury and punish them for their rebellions and idolatry, even if they are hiding out in Babylon. I mean, did you ever stop and think about that? That some of them might have decided to become captives just so they could hide out and make it? I mean, after all, Babylonians worship some of the same gods they do, so why not? You know, it would be a good thing for them. But you got to remember, God is the God of the past. He's the God of the present and the future. He knows everything. He sees everything. And he's saying he will be king. Past, present, and future. He is king. That's the term he's using. There's always been a remnant in Israel that will follow him, always. Just as there is in the church today, a remnant that is following the Lord. The whole planet Earth isn't following him, but those of us who love him and have given our lives to him, we're part of that remnant. There are those who are in exile in Babylon who are following him, and they're not allowing the culture to conform them, and they're not doing anything to allow it. Ever wonder why, how many people they actually took captivity into Nebuchadnezzar's court? I've wondered that. I don't find the record anywhere, but we only know about Daniel and his three buds. That's it. Daniel and the guys, four guys, who actually stood up and refused to allow the culture to conform them, and they decided that they were going to stand for the Lord, showing that even in exile, God's king, and he is their king. But he's also going to be king in the future. So when he says, I will be king, he's saying, I will be king now, and I will be king in the future, as well as in the present. Being in Babylon, again, was for those who had a predilection to worship idols. It was just more of the same. They could worship idols in Babylon. It was going to be a good thing for them, because now they were in a place where that was really culturally acceptable to do. But God is making his presence felt, even there. Today we have folks who think that, well, if I moved to a certain location, then I can do the kinds of things that I like to do because there it's culturally acceptable. So I've always wondered why people who like to gamble move to Vegas and then 6 months later they want to leave because they have no more money. Or what? I mean, yeah, it's culturally acceptable to do that there, but you lose your shirt, literally. God makes his presence felt, and he does there too. There's a great number of ministries in Las Vegas. But here, God is letting the elders know that he is intending to assert his kingship over them in the present and into the future. Their rebellion is going to end, and God's trying to point that out to them, that they can't continue doing this. Verse 34, I will bring you out from the peoples and gather you from the lands where you are scattered. What do you mean the lands? Aren't they just in Babylon? What's up with that? With a mighty hand and with an outstretched arm and with wrath poured out, there it is again, and I will bring you into the wilderness of the peoples, and there I will enter into judgment with you face to face. So let's unpack that. He's talking about some future events that have not taken place yet. Ezekiel, by the way, used a plural form. He didn't say you're in Babylon. He said from the lands, plural. It's more than just what's going on in Babylon at that current moment. He is no longer talking about 500 BC. He is now way past He's way out in the future. He's somewhere out there. He's in the future. it's more than what's going on in the present time. God is going to bring judgment on his people. That's going to happen. But then he's going to bring them back from the nations. And the term he uses here for nations is the same as for the Exodus from Egypt. Exact same term. And there you see the wrath thing again, where he's going to be involved in judging his people. In Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 1 to 10, here's what's promised to the nation if they don't follow the Lord appropriately. There are blessings and cursings. So it shall be when all of these things have come upon you, the blessing and the curse which I've set before you, and you call them to mind in all nations where the Lord your God has banished you. There it is. They're going to be promised. Moses told them, you're going to be banished to all these nations because you're not going to follow. And you return to the Lord your God and obey him with all your heart and soul according to all that I command you today, you and your sons. Then the Lord your God will restore you from captivity. That hasn't happened yet. What he's talking about is a future event. They are being regathered, but not in belief right now. But there is a future event that they will be all at the same time. The entire nation as one will ask for the Messiah to come and save them. Then the Lord your God will restore you from captivity and have compassion on you and will gather you again from all the peoples where your Lord God has scattered you. If your outcasts are at the ends of the earth, from there the Lord your God will gather you. When you see ends of the earth, think Boca Raton or or India. There's a large group in India. There's a large group they're all over the world is where God's people have gone. The Lord your God will bring you into the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it, and he will prosper you and multiply you more than your fathers. Moreover, the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, that you may live. The Lord your God will inflict all these curses on your enemies and on those who hate you, who persecuted you. And you shall again obey the Lord and observe all his commandments, which I command you today. This has not happened yet. Then the Lord your God will prosper you abundantly in all the work of your hand, in the offspring of your body, and in the offspring of your cattle, and in the produce of your ground. For the Lord will again rejoice over you for good, just as he's rejoiced over your fathers. If you obey the Lord your God to keep his commandments and his statutes, which are written in this book of the law, if you turn to the Lord your God with all your heart and soul. By the way, the first promise in Deuteronomy 30 is not one that most people will claim, especially in Israel. It is a promise that you will be sent out to all the nations, that Israel will literally be dispersed everywhere. And it did happen. Of course, at this point with Ezekiel, they're in Babylon, but they're not dispersed everywhere. But in 70 A.D., Jerusalem was conquered by Rome, and 40,000 Jews were taken into slavery into Rome. 1 million were killed in Jerusalem. The rest were left in the land. But in 135 A.D., there is a guy by the name of Bar Kokhba, which means son of the star. He thought he was Messiah. He wasn't. But there was a problem in 135 A.D. where Rome once again had to come in and put down a rebellion. And this time when they did it, they shut down the fact that Jews could no longer live in Jerusalem, and they turned it into a pagan city. In fact, history tells us that the conflict was so ferocious and the casualties were extremely high that the Romans were forced to deploy additional legions, and we have them, Legion 2 from Cyrenaica and Legion 3 from Galatia, as well as auxiliary units attached to the 2 legions already there. So that's 40,000 troops minimum. And to be a legionnaire, when you signed up for 18 years. And if you re-enlisted it was another 18 years. What a great deal. So we have 4 legions, and Hadrian, who was the emperor at that time, when he conquered, there were so many casualties on both sides that he did not report to the Senate like they normally do, all is well with me in the legions. He never said that, because all was not well. Many of them had died. According to Cassiodeo, Jewish casualties in the combat alone were 500,000. And the deaths were probably more, around 1 million. Now, what Rome did after that, and this is again They were promised that they were going to be spread all throughout all the nations. This is just showing how it happened. The new city that Rome built on top of Jerusalem was exclusively pagan when it first was built. There was a temple built on the Temple Mount to Jupiter Capitolinus. So there was a temple built to Jupiter, where the temple sits, where the temple is supposed to sit. Coins were actually issued by the city that said that they had the goddess Hygeia or Dionysius overseeing the city, and Jews were actually forbidden from going into Jerusalem, much less into the surrounding area. They got kicked out. This didn't last forever, but it did last for a couple hundred years, and the prohibition was death if they actually walked in. So were they kicked out and forced to go everywhere? Absolutely. It's a historical fact. That took place. Yet they remained culturally distinctive and were able to return in, 1948, using Hebrew as their major language? Amazing. But here in Ezekiel, we read not only of a dispersion, but it says a wilderness of peoples. That's an interesting term. And in verse 35, I'll bring you into the wilderness of the peoples, and there I'll enter into judgment with you face to face. What he's talking about is there's going to be a second Exodus where Israel comes back into the land. It's not happening right now. This is not the current Exodus that we're talking about. Yes, there are millions of Jews who have gone home to Israel, and there are many more who are returning every day. But this is a different Exodus that's in view, and they're coming from another type of wilderness, a wilderness of peoples, a wilderness full of people. And there it says God will personally judge them. It could refer to the present worldwide dispersion of the Jews that ended in 1948. Could be. That's one possibility. But it could be also a different event as well. In Isaiah chapter 11, verses 11 to 16, it says, "It'll happen on that day that the Lord will again recover the second time with his hand the remnant of his people who will remain from Assyria, Egypt, Pathros, Cush, Elam, Shinar, Hamath, and from the islands of the sea." That's basically saying from every place, everywhere, all around the world. "He will lift up a standard for the nations and assemble the banished ones of Israel, and will gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth." That's happening right now, by the way. "Then the jealousy of Ephraim will depart, and those who harass Judah will be cut off." That hasn't happened. There's still a lot of people harassing Judah. "Ephraim will not be jealous of Judah, and Judah will not harass Ephraim." There aren't two kingdoms in Israel. There's one. It's a unified country. That's taken place. "They will swoop down on the slopes of the Philistines on the west. Together they'll plunder the sons of the east. They will possess Edom and Moab, and the sons of Ammon will be subject to them. And the Lord will utterly destroy the tongue of the sea of Egypt, and he will wave his hand over the river with his scorching wind, and he will strike it into 7 streams and make men walk over it dry shod." That hasn't happened yet either. And this next one really hasn't happened. "And there'll be a highway from Assyria for the remnant of his people who will be left, just as in Israel in the day that they came up out of the land of Egypt." That's yet to occur. There is a promise. There's something that's going to happen in Israel in the future. So is that the wilderness we're talking about, that second Exodus where they all come in? Or is it something else? A bit more about this. This also may have a meaning that is specific to the tribulation period. Okay? The expression desert of the people, which is Midbar Hamamim, refers to no man's land. It's a land of wandering and death through which tribes and people pass, but nobody recognizes it as a homeland. Isolated from the nations, God may engage his people without interference and distraction, and the meeting is described as a face-to-face encounter between God and his people. Panim el Panim recalls the manner in which Moses used to meet with God. So the terms used here in the Hebrew point back to what happened when Moses talked to God face to face. It's talking about a face-to-face judgment of some kind. But the emphasis is not on the intimacy of the relationship here, but on the directness of the encounter. There is no cloud, no mediator at this particular time that's going to shield Israel from what's about to happen. So we're not talking about Babylon. Yeah, he's looking at that, but he's looking at something that takes place during the tribulation, just prior to or at the same time that Christ returns to rescue his nation. In Hosea chapter 2, verses 14 and 15, it says this, "Therefore, behold, I will allure her," talking about Israel. "I will bring her into the wilderness." There you have it. He's going to bring those who were alive at the time into the wilderness and speak kindly to her. "I'll give her her vineyards from there, and the valley of Achor as a door of hope. And she will sing there as in the days of her youth, as in the day when she came up from the land of Egypt," pointing to a second Exodus. In Matthew chapter 24, when we were talking about the Olivet Discourse, Jesus talks about an event that'll take place where most of the nation heads for the hills. Not all of them will, but most of them will. He says in verse 15, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation," in other words, when Antichrist shows up in the temple, which is going to be rebuilt, there are all kinds of folks trying to make that happen right now as we talk, but the temple will be rebuilt, and at the 3.5-year point in a 7-year treaty that this person signs with Israel, this person who signed the treaty will show up in Jerusalem, go to the Holy of Holies, and say, "I'm God, worship me." That's the abomination of desolation that's taking place. So it says, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, because Jesus wants to make sure that folks who are seeing this event happen know what they need to do. "Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains." I mean, don't go home, just head for the hills. "Whoever's on the housetop must not go down to get the things out that are in his house. Whoever's in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. Woe to those who are pregnant, to those who are nursing babies in those days. But pray that your flight will not be in the winter or on a Sabbath, for then there will be a great tribulation, such as not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will, unless those days have been cut short. No life would have been saved, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short." God's telling them, when you see this event, go to the wilderness. And what we're seeing here is God's going to bring them back from this wilderness at a point in the future. Now you remember, at the 3.5-year point, much of Israel is hiding in the wilderness. They've been there since this event took place at the 3.5-year point. The main concentration of Jews and Jewish leaders won't be in Jerusalem anymore. They won't be in Israel. But the scriptures tell us they're going to be in a place called Basra, which is about 5 miles from a place called Petra, which is in Jordan. It's in the land of Edom, present-day southern Jordan. And since the main purpose of the campaign, this is Armageddon that we're talking about, when the main purpose, the Antichrist will show up with his armies, and he wants to kill all the remaining Jews. So he's going to be moving south from Jerusalem to Basra to encounter the Jews. And when that happens, they're going to all as one ask for the Lord to come and save them. In Micah 2:12, God says, "I will surely assemble all of you, Jacob. I will gather the remnant of Israel. I will put them together like sheep in the fold, like a flock in the midst of its pasture. They will be noisy with men," wilderness of people. There you have it. They will be noisy with men. Hosea 5:15, Jesus, talking through the prophet, says, "I will go away and return to my place, until they acknowledge their guilt and seek my face. In their affliction they will earnestly seek me." The entire nation of Israel, as one, when this is all occurring towards the end of the tribulation, will, as one, pray, "Messiah, save us." And at that point, Jesus returns to planet Earth to do exactly that. Isaiah 63:1 gives us the account of what that's going to look like. He doesn't come to the Mount of Olives first. He goes to Basra, where they are. Remember, he's having a confrontation with them face to face.
We're so glad you tuned into today's edition of The Unsafe Bible with Pastor Ken. For more information about this ministry and what we believe, you can find all you need to know at theunsafebible.com. Want to hear more messages from Ezekiel? We've got that too. Just look under the Media tab. Again, our website is theunsafebible.com. As you've been listening to this teaching in Ezekiel, what are some of the things that come to mind? Do you struggle with unresolved sins in your life? Have you found yourself wondering why your life isn't going as planned? Can you imagine what it would be like to be exiled from paradise and to be told it was all your fault? That's the truth that Ezekiel had to deliver to the Jews from Babylon. It took 70 years. but they finally accepted their sin as their own and returned in faith to God. Where are you on that journey? No matter what the circumstances are, you must seek God in all things to ensure a singular focus on the one true God. We want you to find strength in your faith. And if you need help or have questions, you can contact us directly at theunsafebible.com. Just click on the Connect tab and the Connect card. Fill it out, and we'll get in touch with you. If you're in the Jupiter, Florida area, we want to invite you to our next worship service. Directions can be found on the About tab by clicking the word Contact. We hope to see you soon. Well, that's all the time we have for today, but we want to invite you back again next for more encouraging and uplifting messages by Pastor Ken, right here on the Unsafe Bible.